Focus trees are one of the most important mechanics in Hearts of Iron 4. Without them, most nations would feel extremely similar and very shallow. So it makes sense that a lot of mods that are on the Steam Workshop aim to give or improve focus trees in Hearts of Iron 4. Unfortunately, most of them aren't very well designed. To a certain extent, this is to be expected. After all, there will always be mods that aren't very well made in any workshop. That's just how that stuff works. But what makes this current situation with focus trees interesting is that most of them suffer from the same problems and fall into the same pitfalls. The focus tree that best exemplifies this is the Belgian focus tree in the Great War Redux. Before I move on, I should make a quick disclaimer. First of all, this mod is still in beta, and thus is being changed and patched as we speak. Secondly, I'm not a modder or a game designer. I'm just some random dude on the internet, so don't take my opinion as fact. Thirdly, I don't hold any ill will towards the modding team behind the Great War Redux, and I don't wish any negativity or hate to be directed towards their way. I just think one of their focus trees is flawed. That's it. With that out of the way, let's begin. So what is the point of a focus tree anyways? This might sound like a stupid question, but I think it's an important one to keep in mind when you take a look at a focus tree. To me, the point of a focus tree is to first provide a goal to the player that they can try to achieve, and the second, to provide more context and content specific to that nation. If you keep both these things in mind, you'll pretty quickly see that there are major flaws in the Belgian focus tree. First, you'll see that the focus tree is split only into two parts, a small focus tree that you have to do before you can get on to the larger one, that finally splits off into 4 different branches. There is no specific industry tree or a military tree. This is usually a bad thing to do. Not splitting the overall focus tree into different parts basically just forces the player to go down specific paths and removes a fun element that is present in many focus trees, that being the choice the player has with what types of focuses they want to do first. They could try to build up the research in industry early on, but by doing that, they'll be delaying their political focus tree and thus their expansion routes. If you look at the base game, you'll find that the best focus trees are split into multiple different sections, with the only exceptions being the US, Mexico, Spain, and Japan. But the reasons why these countries don't have their focus trees split apart becomes more clear when you take a closer look at them. The US already has the largest economy in the world, so it makes sense that they wouldn't really have an industry focus tree. Spain starts the game going into a civil war, and so the focus tree has to be designed very differently from a normal focus tree. And Japan's focus tree is honestly just out of date. And Mexico's just Mexico. I don't really know what to say about that. But aside from those nations, every single focus tree in Hearts of Iron 4 splits it up into industry, politics, and military in one form or another. The very first thing you don't want to do in a focus tree is make it into all just one big focus tree. The second thing not to do is to waste the player's time with the focuses. There is a problem that is extremely rampant in not only the modded focus trees, but even in the base game trees, and that's the over-reliance on 70-day focuses. This created the ridiculous situation where you'd spend 70 days to get a bonus that quite literally had no effect whatsoever on your game. But what makes the Belgian focus egregious in this case isn't because they only use 70-day long focuses. In fact, they actually use shorter focuses in many different parts of the tree. No, what makes this focus tree suck is how it wastes your fucking time doing nothing. The initial focus tree has a certain branch called, and forgive me, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, where you first spend 70 days to get plus 5% stability and 10 political power. You then spend close to 70 days to then have the next focus get cancelled and bypassed and lose 100 political power and 5 stability in the process. You then spend another 70 days getting 5 stability. So as a recap, we as the player have spent 210 days of in-game time to get a total of plus 5% stability and negative 90 political power. This sucks. Don't do this. Never fucking design a focus tree like this. Don't waste the player's time doing nothing. This isn't fun. This isn't interesting. It's not even engaging. This is just bad design. But what's even worse is how little content and background history this focus tree has. You can unironically finish this entire focus tree by 1914. AKA by the time the war starts. And when I say the entire focus tree, I really mean doing every single focus you could possibly do as a player. This means you have nothing to do when the war actually starts, which is really unfortunate, because there are so many interesting things you could do with a Belgian focus tree. In real life, Belgium had one of the most impressive fortification systems of its time, but in this mod, Belgium doesn't start off with a single fort in its country. In real life, Belgium flooded their country and sabotaged railway lines, and is quoted by many historians to be the reason why the Schlieffen Plan failed. But in this mod, Belgium doesn't get anything to represent that fact at all. Hell, this mod even fails to acknowledge the fact that Belgium had a large economy for the size of its nation, ranking as the 12th largest GDP in the world at that time, and having a very large industrial base for the size of its nation. But in this mod, Belgium only starts off with 3 civs, 2 mills, and 1 naval dockyard. For context, Canada, Portugal, Serbia, Sweden, and many other countries start off with significantly more factories than Belgium does. So the third thing not to do in a HOI4 focus tree is to ignore a country's history and not bother to incorporate anything interesting or immersive to a country. But everything that I've pointed out so far pales into comparison to the national spirits Belgium has in this mod. National spirits are inherently connected to a focus tree, with focus trees either removing or adding new national spirits. Belgium starts the game with a few national spirits that I'm going to address one by one. First, they start with a national spirit called Congo Atrocities. This national spirit affects how much you can improve relations as a player. Okay, I don't think I need to tell you why this national spirit sucks, because this national spirit might as well not exist. This literally has no effect on your game. You never need to improve relations with the AI. And what makes it worse is that you have to get rid of this national spirit before you can proceed to the larger focus tree. So why does this national spirit exist? It doesn't do anything, it has no actual effect on the player, and it's removed almost instantaneously when you start the game. The next national spirit that I'll be talking about is called Ingrained Pacifism, which gives you significant debuff to training time and recruitable population. There is no focus to remove the national spirit, just a decision that has to be taken 6 times, and each time spend 20 army XP in the process. Meaning, in total, you have to spend 120 army XP. Now this national spirit isn't the worst, but it is pretty unengaging. For example, the national spirit is actually pretty close to the Dutch one in the base game. The difference being, in the base game, there are multiple different options you can take as the Dutch player in order to remove the national spirit. But in the Great War Redux, you just have one national spirit where you have to spend 120 army XP. And by the way, forcing the player to spend 120 army XP just to remove a national spirit is a little bit much for the situation that Belgium is in, especially in the new update, where army XP is extremely important and it's very difficult to get your hands on. But so far, none of these national spirits have been that bad. They're a bit boring and uninteresting, sure, but this national spirit that I'm about to show you is on another level. This national spirit is called Neglected Military. This national spirit is unironically one of the worst national spirits I have ever seen in my over 1,000 hours of playing Hearts of Iron 4. This national spirit grants a variety of negative effects, so I'll just go over its large ones. It grants a minus 15% to attack. It grants a minus 20% research speed for these techs. It grants a minus 50% to defense. I repeat, it grants a 50% debuff to defense. It grants a minus 50% to entrenchment. This, by the way, is especially significant because as a World War I game, entrenchment is extremely important. And finally, the final effect this significant spirit gives you is a minus 50% debuff to organization. Not organization recovery, organization. This national spirit makes it impossible to play as Belgium. Straight up impossible for you to do anything whatsoever in any war. This is a war game and it's impossible to do anything with this national spirit. And what makes it so much worse is the fact that you can't get rid of this national spirit. You heard me. You can't get rid of it. It's permanent. It doesn't go away through a decision or an event. Trust me, I've looked through the fucking game files to make sure of that. The only way this national spirit can be removed is by going down the authoritarianism path, where after 105 days, you can remove it. Only for it to be replaced by another national spirit that lasts for 720 days, which gives a massive 40% consumer goods debuff. Where do I even start with this? First of all, this national spirit is way too fucking punishing to the player, and the fact that it can only be removed by going down one part of the focus tree and one ideology basically forces every single person to go down that path and that ideology. Because if you don't, you're just going to be shooting yourself in the foot 100 times over. And the debuff you get for removing it is extremely punishing, and basically kills your economy for the rest of the fucking game, easily making it so that you won't have a single civilian factory for 2 years. Who thought that this was a good idea? Please, tell me, who thought that this was a good idea? Who thought that this was a fun thing for the player to deal with? Please, explain to me how this was a good idea. Because it isn't. Don't do this. Don't do any of this. If you are going to have a significant negative national spirit, let the player remove it, and don't lock it behind a specific ideology, and then don't fuck over the player for trying to remove it. Alright, I think I'm done with that rant. Sorry about that. I don't want this entire video to just be me complaining about this one specific focus tree. I know that there's been a lot of effort put into this mod, and I doubt the modders tried to make the Belgian focus tree bad on purpose. But I still think that there's a lot of problems with it, and so to make this video actually constructive, I'm going to be making my own suggestions to the Belgian focus tree on what could be changed for the better. The suggestions I'm about to make are just the suggestions that I personally think are good for the mod. I'm not trying to say that they're the objective best way to go around things, because honestly, they're probably not. But before I can start making suggestions, it's important to keep in mind what role the mod team of the Great War Redux wants Belgium to play. While I obviously can't read the developers' minds, my best guess is that they want Belgium to be a weak country that will typically be conquered by Germany. This means that at the very least when historical AI is turned on, Belgium should never have the chance to hold back against the German advance. So, I'm going to be keeping this in mind as I go through my suggestions. The very first thing that I would change are the national spirits that Belgium starts off with. I would probably remove all the current negative national spirits and replace them with only 2. The first national spirit would relate to the state of Belgium's military, since during this time period, Belgium did have serious shortcomings with its armed force. In particular, its army lacked experienced officers, and the general staff had never been in a war before. So, this should be reflected in a new national spirit, which affects max organization recovery rate, max planning, and attack. But these numbers should never be as high as neglected military was, and should probably look something around the lines of this. Something that is impactful to the player, but doesn't make it impossible to play the game in the first place. The second major national spirit I would probably give to Belgium would probably be called something along the lines of linguistic divides. Belgium is a nation inherently divided between the French in the south and the Flemish in the north, and such a divide has always gone in the way of many governments in Belgium. It's a problem that still hampers Belgium to this very day, and so a national spirit that relates to this should not only have a large effect, but should also be very difficult to remove. I'd probably have the national spirit have numbers along the lines of this, sort of similar to France, where it basically kills your political power gain, your stability, and your surrender limit. Which brings me to the overall focus tree. I would probably split the focus tree into 3 different parts: political, industry, and military. In the political focus tree, I would actually keep the 4 paths the way they are. It makes sense that the 4 paths would be Labour, Conservative, Liberal, and Monarchist, as these were the largest political movements in Belgium around this time. I would, however, have the political trees of each ideology focus on trying to address the linguistic divide in the ways their ideology would. Labour, for example, would focus on uniting the nation through classes. Liberals could try to reform the central government. The monarchs could try to create a new national identity under the crown, etc., etc. I would also give extra content at the end of the political focus trees. For example, when you conquer the lowlands as the king, you should have a couple focuses afterwards that sort of reward the player for being able to do such a thing. The army tree would mostly focus on trying to remove and reduce the effects of the military national spirit, with there being multiple focuses you can take to reduce certain debuffs of the national spirit, while also giving the player a certain small extra bonus for taking that focus in the first place. For example, there could be a focus called War Games that reduces the max planning debuff and the organization debuff while also giving a plus 50% bonus to a doctrine. Another thing that a military tree should include would be special bonuses that Belgium had specifically in real life. For example, a focus that talks about the Fabrique Nationale Gestale, which existed as a small arms producer back then and is now one of the largest small arms exporters in the entire world. Or maybe a focus that talks about the Minerva car, or maybe a focus that talks about inundation lines and flooding the country, something that happened in real life during this time period. There's so many interesting things you could include here to make Belgium just a little bit more interesting, while still keeping it balanced. And it's really unfortunate that the original focus tree didn't have those things included. As for the industry tree, we can't just make a normal industry tree like we usually do that gives the same amount of factories as the base game. Since in this mod, factories are meant to be harder to come by. But Belgium should also have a powerful industry for a nation of its size. So there should at least be a few factories the player can get in this focus tree. I would have the tree split up into two different areas, one that focuses on mainland development, and one that focuses on development in the Congo. Each of these trees should give the player some basic infrastructure, maybe some extra resources, especially steel, since it makes no sense that Belgium would only have 11 steel at the start of the game, since they're one of the largest producers of steel during this era, and even a few factories. There should also be a part of the tree that focuses on fortifications, since Belgium had a large system of forts built in its country. So, with all these changes implemented, what do we get? We get a nation that has a lot of problems that can't easily be solved, but a nation that if you put enough effort into it, it could be powerful in its own right. A nation that actually has some good things about it, like a strong industry and decent resources, and even a few things to flavor it up. This is a nation that is, in my opinion, at the very least, a hell of a lot more fun than the previous focus tree made it out to be. Look, a focus tree can make or break a modern nation, and if you don't manage to make a good one, you'll easily make a nation almost unplayable for an average player. Not every single focus tree needs to make a nation powerful, but at the very least, it should make them viable, and should provide the player plenty of options and thinking to make them fun and interesting to play through. The Belgian focus tree is a perfect example of what happens when you fall into many of the classic problems that many modded focus trees struggle with. And hopefully, through this video, I've not only shown what these problems are, but maybe even how to fix them, and hopefully make a better focus tree in the process. But hey, I'm just some random guy on the internet. If you disagree with me, please let me know by leaving a comment discussing your thoughts. Who knows, maybe I'm completely off the mark when it comes to this. Either way, I think I'm gonna head out now, so I'll see you later, and I hope you have a good day.